with a house burn.
Hurricane Hugo hit the eastern United States on September 21st, 1989. In one terrifying night, the storm caused 21 deaths and $7 billion in damage.
Sure enough, go ahead and get what you need.
The South Carolina Low Country, from McClellanville to Murrells Inlet, was ground zero. These are our stories.
We weren't expecting it to be as bad as it was, but of course, you know, as it got closer, we most definitely knew that it was really serious and it was going to be a real bad hurricane.
We had just been watching the Weather Channel for a week, probably. My parents are crazy about the Weather Channel. They just leave it on all the time with the music in the background. And my father is always the one who panics and has to go buy everything, and my mother says it's never coming here.
Growing up, we always heard about hurricanes, and they would say a big hurricane is going to hit us, and then it would turn around and go off somewhere else. So when Hurricane Hugo actually was in the ocean nearby, we didn't believe that it was actually going to hit us.
We lived in Pawleys Island, and we were told we had to leave there. We are not from here, and so we had never been in a hurricane or knew anything about a hurricane.
I was a senior in high school, so I was in high school, so it was like no school. I mean, that's all everybody talked about. But I was so young that you didn't really care, you weren't really worried about like the destruction of anything that was gonna happen. It was just more of the exciting that everybody was like buckling down and everybody was getting everything to prepare.
With my family, we just ran out to the local store, which was Walmart, and to gather water, batteries, flashlights, and some perishable items so that we can get ready for the storm. It was really busy in Georgetown. It seemed like the cars was just, going back and forth. Everybody's in a big rush.
As the day went on, the wind stopped blowing even more, but we had no idea it would end up the way it did because the day was so beautiful.
An announcement came, said we are pulling the plug on the island at 11 o'clock. So therefore, you're on your own.
I was about 4 years old, and I remember my dad taping up all the windows with X's, and we bought a lot of candles and batteries to get prepared for the storm.
When I drove to work that morning, everything was normal. But driving back, I'm looking around, and all of a sudden, it's like mayhem. People are driving crazy. They're driving on the shoulder of the road. Everybody's got trailers. Everybody's packing up stuff. Gas stations are running out of gas. On the radio, the restaurants are saying we're giving away free ice cream, we're giving away free steaks, we're giving away free beer. The restaurants all knew the power was going to be out and all their food was going to go bad.
I got to school the morning of, and they said no school, but you've got to pack your room and move all the stuff away from the windows. By then I'm getting a little panicky, so I'll run by the grocery store, which is packed, and got a few things and dashed home, and my husband and I talked about leaving, and I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay in our house. Our house was built in 1840, so I figured, well, it had lasted this long, maybe it'll last a little longer. Maybe that was very foolish.
But I was working for a private community called Deborah, and so they were beginning to evacuate, and I still, at that time, didn't think it was serious. And so when the manager finally said, now Barbara, you've got to go, it's really serious. I said, well, okay. So I get in the car and come out to get on Highway 17, and it was bumper to bumper for miles, both lanes.
I was part of the Pawleys Island Litchfield Rescue Squad at the time, and we spent But when they told us about the storm coming in, so we started preparing for like evacuations and getting people to safe places and stuff. So and as the days went on, we were all like running around with the fire trucks and the ambulance and stuff, which is pretty exciting to me because I love doing that kind of work.
And I was working at a place called Winyah Extended Care. We had 44 residents there. And we had to move every one of those out of the rooms and line them up in the halls away from windows.
We had to take shelter at the school I was going to.
My cousins came down and they were in Charleston. So when they came down, they ended up having to come inland, which was in Andrews. So we had a room holed in full of cousins. That was like crazy. It was like 20 of us.
Everybody was panicking. I wanted to stay in Georgetown, but my husband decided we better go to Darlington instead.
Some people were panicking, and near that time when it was getting close by, that's when everyone started getting nervous. And I was one of the ones getting nervous.
I think we gassed up the cars. We didn't get gasoline extra though, because we didn't have any containers, which we really should have done later, we realized, but at that point we didn't think about that.
We didn't want to leave, but since the police came by the third time and said we should leave, we left. So about 8 caravans of cars took off and went to Manning. We stayed in a motel. It had like a center place where you could put your cars, and the people that put their cars in there got them ruined because things flew all over and hit them. Some of the trees came down, the roof blew off of our motel.
My husband was sick with cancer. He was very sick, so we couldn't evacuate. We stayed home for it, and it was an awful time. It sounded like a train coming over and then coming back. It did a lot of damage in our yard, and of course my husband slept through it, and so the next morning he woke up, he said, "Bertha, why there's so much trash in our yard?"
I was 10. I had 2 older brothers and 1 younger brother, but we went outside and felt the strong winds and played in the winds. We actually thought it was pretty fun. We'd run against the wind, or we would run with the wind and jump in the air, and it would carry us about 5 or 6 feet.
But I can remember driving across the parking lot and the wind picking up the rear end of our patrol car and bouncing it across the parking lot. It was just, really weird.
About the time the storm hit, when it became nightfall, we did go in and try to sleep, but it was just too exciting and too worrisome, wondering what would happen next.
They gathered us all up into the living room floor because all the big trees were in the backyard, like I said, and we didn't think about the big oak tree in the front yard, and half of it snapped off, but it didn't hit the house, so we got lucky on that one.
One of the problems for myself is when I was young, I cracked my skull, so the barometric pressures affect my head, and I get incredible headaches, and it was very difficult for me to stay awake and not be in excruciating pain. So I was sleeping or trying to sleep with the wind and the howling.
I started crying. I was worried to death. I would not go to my bedroom and sleep in the bed. I made my husband and I, we actually closed off all the doors to our hallway and put pillows and blankets, and that's where we stayed. And then I would not let him go to sleep because I wasn't going to sleep, and every few seconds I was like, what was that? What was that? What was that?
When it came, I was kind of not shocked, but like in a whoa state.
It was dark, it was just raining like crazy, and we couldn't get out. We had a bunch of kids and animals, dogs.
Immediately the electricity is out and it's hot, and but we still had oil lamps and candles, and but it was suffocating because you couldn't open the windows.
My mother's home was right next door, and during that storm, of course, the wind was just furious. And I sent my husband over to get my mother and bring her over to us. And so he went, and came just by the time he got to the fence, the wind just picked them up both up about that high.
It got so hot, I couldn't stand it. Well, right across the hall was the bathroom. So I was closer to the bathroom, so I got up and I went and raised the window about that much. And then the rain came through all the way through the bathroom and hit me right in the face.
My husband got up to see if he could check around the house, but we couldn't get out of the house because I guess it was the wind pushing against the house. And every time we tried to get the door open, the suction would keep the door from opening.
We heard some awful sounds. My husband did peep out the door because we heard a very big calamity one time. And he walked outside to kind of peep. It sounded like my mother's trailer. She had a trailer right beside. But actually it was the flute on top of our house. It came down, but it made a horrible, horrible sound.
It sounded like a train or of an engine running, and it was very, very loud. And before you know it, the windows start breaking and scattering, and you could hear the sounds of tins, torn off trailers, running around the house over and over and over. And I peep out the window, and I can see people's car being smashed by trees, and I can see tins rolling around the house. And at that time, my wife and my mother-in-law got very frightened, and they went into a closet.
We didn't have our door, family door. We didn't board it up. And all of a sudden, boosh, you hear the wind knock that down, knock it loose. So me and my family got up and we went to the shed and tried to nail it up during the storm. And all the water started coming into our family room.
A tree or a limb or something had broken a window on our trailer, and me and my father was out there, and he was scurrying just to try to nail it straight into the trailer, and just something to hold it up, because he knew once the storm went one way and then the eye came over that the storm would be coming the other way. So no sooner did we have the board up, we had like one nail in it. The wind was kicking, it come back and it kicked in so hard that we just let it go and the board stayed up against the trailer. So we had to go inside at that moment because it was extremely dangerous.
Off of my parents' home, they have a car garage. It lifted the car garage completely off, and then part of the roof came off from the garage, the kitchen, into the area we were at. So immediately we jumped up and ran into another room. And as we got, it's like every room we would go into, the storm just progressively got worse. And it started raining in. We went into our living room. We stayed there for maybe 10 or 15 minutes or so. And my mom was like, we're going to have to go to the back of the house, because we ended up in the front of the house. And I mean, we could just hear the roar. I mean, it sounded like a train had came through.
The snake came out the television. That's where he was living, in the back of the television, a huge snake. It really was. It was around about 6 foot long.
Since I was not acquainted with hurricanes, I was flabbergasted to know that when a hurricane comes in, the wind blowing from the northeast, and then once it tears up that direction, it'll come in blowing from the opposite direction. What it hasn't torn up from that direction, it tears up from the other direction.
I had opened up the windows to let the pressure off the house. And the candles that we had, when it would go to the north, it was like it sucked all the oxygen out of the house. And the candles would have a flame on them about like this. And they would go down to just a spark. And I would reach, no matter how many times I said to myself, I don't need to do this, I would reach for the matches. And just as I'd reach for the matches, the wind would go to the south in the backyard, like it was going around the house. And when it did, all the oxygen would come back in and the candle would go back up to about a 2 or 3 inch flame.
We were in bed and we heard like loud noises, crashes around.
All kind of weird noises and screaming, and I don't know. And it was just one of those frightening experiences.
When the lights came off and to a way, I just started realizing, like, you know, how it was, almost was to be kind of homeless.
It sounded like people shooting a rifle, pow, pow, like that. And we had no idea what it was, couldn't see anything. And eventually it got calmed down a little bit and we got a little sleep. Well, the next morning we woke up and the pow, pow were the pine trees snapping off.
Wood started hitting the roof. So about that time I went downstairs. He was in the den with a big window. And wood started hitting that window. So we went to a little hallway in the back of the house and spent the rest of the night back there.
Looking out the windows, you could see the oak tree in the front and the oak tree in the back just going down like this and then coming up. These are trees that didn't normally move very much.
We got to Georgetown High, and here I am thinking that we would be laying on cots and stuff. We had to sit on that cold floor, and just to hear the wind going across that roof, it was very hysterical. I mean, I was through. I couldn't do anything all night long but just look up at the roof.
My family was there, everybody, my grandmother, my cousins, aunts, uncle, we were all together. And I can remember hearing the wind on the outside, and she lived like in a stone. You could feel the house like moving a little.
We, couldn't comprehend how bad it was going to be. And when it was full force over us, we were very afraid. We were inside of a home that, of course, all of us were in closets at one point because we were afraid the roof was just going to blow off the house.
We were actually on a bus. My pastor and my father also worked together, and they sold school buses. And so he had a school bus parked in his garage, and about 25 of us gathered in the garage and actually, went into the bus. And I remember getting on the bus, and I remember hearing the sound of a very loud train, I guess you would. A train that it sounded like it was right on top of us. And we actually lived close to a railroad track, so that's what I thought it was.
Down in Arcadia, they have these old houses. I mean, they're really hundreds of years old houses. And we were just there, and it's just kind of funny, but we all kind of just hung out there. And then we got supplies and stuff together just in case the lights went out and that type thing. But as the night went on, you could hear the wind picking up, and you could hear things going on outside.
I remember we was all at my mother's house, and everything started, winds, the tent, we had a tent at that time, so the tent on the roof was shaking and the window was rattling, and we all got afraid. And we called other relatives and friends, and they said everybody was to report at Sample Elementary. And we all went to the elementary school for shelter.
All the students was ordered to go in the gymnasium, so we spent the night in the gymnasium. And we woke up and there were cars flipped over, power outage, phone lines down. It was chaos.
My son was with me, and he was almost 4 years old, so I couldn't let on how scared I was because I didn't want him to be that frightened.
I've got the smallest grandchildren, and we just went to bed and left the others up having their party, whatever they wanted to do. And my husband, he kept lookout.
I remember going out into the eye when the eye come across Berkeley County, and just walking up and down the street and just looking at the major devastation that went on in Goose Creek at the time that I was there. And I mean, we had trees down, we had power lines down, we had the roofs on houses that were completely removed, sheds in other people's yards, or our shed was 3 houses down.
One of the things we anticipated, we knew that this was a big storm, so we were not sure that the survivability of the bridges going into Georgetown. So we actually arranged to have a physician who stayed in the fire station so that if we had any type of emergency medical needs, we would have that physician available. And in fact, during the storm as it approached, we did have several people who came in and had to be treated. One was a broken limb. Another person actually had a heart problem and had to be taken to the fire station because the storm had gotten to the point that you couldn't go over the bridges anymore. and that person stayed at the fire station, was sedated by the physician and cared for the full time that the storm was there. And when they woke up the next day, the storm had already passed and they didn't even know it had even gone through.
And we just told old stories, and we laughed, talked about the future, things like that. We kind of made our way through until we kind of went to bed, woke up the next morning, it was all over. And that was something else.
I was asleep the whole time during the storm. All through the storm, I was asleep. When I woke up, all I found, we went riding to find trees, rubbishes, and boats in the backyard.
It was sunny and it was windy, and we toured the city to see what the damage was in the city. And my husband said, this looks just like a war zone, minus bodies. There were limbs, signs down, roofs torn off buildings. It was a horrible sight to see.
Trees were on the roads. The National Guard was there trying to cut them up and get them out of the roads, and it was real scary.
When I woke up the next morning, I mean, you see trees all over the front yard, other people's houses. You couldn't even walk to the grocery store. You know, and a lot of businesses got destroyed up in Charlotte. A lot of looting happened in Charlotte also.
The fire department had to go through with their chainsaws and cut trees out of the roadway and clear the area so that they could get to any kind of fire that might pop up. So, and that was another concern too, fire because of the electricity when it came back on, and then also too you had propane tanks and everything that were dislodged and floating and ending up in various places. So there were a lot of hazards post-Hugo.
All the yards, everywhere, there was debris up to my knees or higher. So we got the rakes out the next day, and everybody was raking. It was, I've never seen so much debris from the trees, everything. Leaves, and just, there was not a spot that was uncovered, that was not covered with all of the debris.
There was not particularly any street. It was all full of tree limbs and trash and everything you could imagine. You couldn't really see the road very much.
The next day after the storm, we heard a rooster crowing. And a rooster had blown in from somewhere else, and he had stationed himself in the Knights of Columbus parking lot right behind our house. Our backyards adjoined. And so we'd wake up every morning for a few days to the rooster crowing. That was very pleasant.
People's rooftops, houses smashed, and right around the corner from us, it was another set of mobile homes flattened.
It looked like World War III. It looked like everything was blown all over the place. There were houses destroyed, people's houses, homes got damaged. It was just devastation.
Driving back into town after the Hurricane Hugo, and I came up, I think 501, heading into Myrtle Beach to where my apartment was. I was so nervous because I knew it was going to have been flooded. And I was in a 1969 LTD Ford. That was my grandparents' gift to me that they used to drive. So unfortunately, because the lines were so long, it overheated. And so I was there with my cat and just trying to get back in, and everyone was just, it was just mass chaos, really.
You had to show that you owned a property or a business in Myrtle Beach before they would let you back in. And that was because they were anticipating, I guess, so many of the oceanfront businesses and hotels had received such intense damage that they were afraid of looting.
There were boats, there were jacuzzis, there were people's docks, parts of people's homes, all of that, all in the road. And when we got down to Creekside, which is where we live, it was just like 2 feet of stuff, all kinds of stuff. They're piling into the road. You could barely walk through the road.
We walked all the way from Surfside down to Garden City.
When I got to Garden City, all that was there was rubble.
The causeways going into Garden City were gone, and you could still see the tide, and there was just wood splinters and refrigerators everywhere. I mean, it was just, it's such a cliche, but it just looked like somebody, like a big giant, had swept across the beach and then smacked everything back down, and it was very spooky. Even now, you know, it's been almost 20 years later, and it's still, when I talk about it, I can feel the hair on the back of my neck kind of standing up a little bit.
Pawleys Island, we had it blocked off, and you couldn't get on the island for a couple of weeks or about a month. And the owners were able to allow to get on, but it was just really devastating.
So we stayed with friends at the Litchfield Country Club for a couple of nights and went back, and they gave me some boots to wear, and I said I could walk in, which I did. We had to leave the car out at the country club, and came back. There was quite a bit of damage to the ocean side of the house, but all the screens were blown out.
All the houses along the creek were swept clean of their downstairs. There wasn't a God's thing left in the downstairs. We found all kind of stuff in the lake there.
Went over to the beach, and I had a friend that had a house over there, and we went, and of course there was no house. But everybody always painted their houses different colors. And you know why they painted them? Because when storms came, you could pick up the boards and put them back together.
I remember going on the beach, and there was sand everywhere. All the pools on the ocean front was filled completely with sand, and there was water up to the second floor of the hotels. And sand came all the way up to King 17. So it was like on the bypass Myrtle Beach, which is like completely from oceanfront to across the street. So that was a lot of sand and a lot of water.
Like the beach, like all the sand was just on the street. It was, you wouldn't think that it would turn out to be as bad as it was.
Well, the weirdest thing I think we saw was it was a dock that came all the way from, I guess, North Carolina and landed all the way at the Harry Dawson restaurant there in Merle's Inlet. And that's about the weirdest. And then we saw a house in Pawleys Island sitting in the, I guess we would call it the canal. And Pawleys Island was a house sitting in the air.
All the pools in the hotels destroyed. And, you know, all the bottom floors just totally wiped out. And some of the houses, like in the Surfside area, I just remember there was a couple that were just like broken in half.
I had just moved into a newly built home, and it was concrete, cinder blocks, and brick. So it kind of withheld that. But now the mobile home that we moved out, it was pushed. It was pushed off its foundation and turned.
We had a beach house on Pawleys Island, and after Hugo, we had 3 beach houses on 3 different islands.
Shingles off the house and some leakage and things like that, but nothing that we couldn't stay in. My mother's house had actually got destroyed, so they came over to us, but we were able to patch ours and live in it till the insurance company come out.
Everything was torn apart. The only thing was there was a foundation, and you see everything in the house from one room to the other. And I said, well, you know, going to bed here, like that. So after that, we decided that we'll try to seek wherever they would have, you know, have available for shelter for anybody who have lost their home. And we went to First Baptist, and we stayed over there until we find help.
the Hugo had come through it and then came back through it. And the house was left with the studs were up, and my house is a brick house, so the sides were there. But it washed things out of the house. It even took the casements from the windows, not just the windows, but the whole works went out.
We had just planted, about 3 years before, we had planted trees, pine trees, out in one of our fields. And when Hugo came along, it just destroyed all of them. My husband had to go out with the saw, of course, and cut them all down.
There had been 11 houses in a row. Not one house was left standing. One house was bashed into the trees. Our house and the house beside ours washed into the road.
We lived in Laurel Bay on the military base, and we had a little pier that I used to fish on, and it was gone.
One of the most amazing things I saw, it looked like it was a path cut behind my yard. And you could see where the tornado had came through, and apparently it didn't break, it didn't twist my fence. It came over, it must be jumped up and went over and hit a tree in my front yard.
My front yard, I had a pecan tree, and it had fallen. Unfortunately for me, it instead of falling towards the house, it fell sort of sideways between the house and the street, so it fell across the yard and didn't damage the house. A pecan tree in the backyard, which was there as long as I can remember, in the backyard, had fallen and actually took my electrical line down with it.
I was very happy that when I came back, the logs had stopped at my front door. No water had gone in from the creek. But there was a great big pine tree, enormous, through my dining room. So that was disaster.
Complete destruction of the streets and the trees that were uprooted because the way the winds went, they all fell in different directions. It knocked down on the side of the highways all of the trees and the light poles and everything else. It was total destruction. It was nothing. The only reason where we lived on our street, the commander of the naval base lived on there, and the Navy cleanup crew come up and cleaned up our street right in front of the house so he could get in and out. I mean, that was being at the right place at the right time.
My in-laws' house, actually, they had pecan trees that were over 100 years old, and I think probably 4 out of the 12 were blown over. One limb of one pecan tree hit the edge of the house, but nobody was hurt. It was just, for them, and they were in the early 80s. It was kind of devastation for them, to see the large trees blown over. And just basically uprooted.
There were trees everywhere, and a lot of people had lost their homes, and they were, somebody came up to us and said, I paid for my home and all that, and now it's gone, everything. It was just laying there like a bunch of splintered wood.
Our house is about 10 feet above the grade because we're in a flood zone, right on the water. And it must have been about 2 feet deep in the garage, but it didn't get inside the house. We were very lucky. And I thought the water would come in, the water would go out. It doesn't work that way. It builds up the pressure, and then the garage doors caved in, and then everything in the garage was like in a washing machine. I mean, it was spread all the way out to behind our house. So one thing about water I learned, water moving 5 miles an hour has the same amount of force as wind at over 100 miles an hour. It's real heavy, and it takes down everything in its path, including like brick walls.
We got a chance to drive up and down 17. Water was flooded all over on both sides of Highway 17. I noticed even on 17 I could see alligators swimming up there around Litchfield, swimming across from one end, from the ocean side to the creek side.
I can remember driving 10, and there used to be a boat
in the water, and the boat was sitting in the middle of the media.
A week afterwards, I had to go to the doctor in Charleston, and I literally cried all the way from Georgetown to Charleston because of the devastation. How the trees them were all snapped off, and it was like it was a message in Hugo because the trees them had a certain bend to it, and you could see where the tornadoes snapped the pine trees them off in half.
The most impressive thing was driving up the highway from Charleston to Greenville, or to Georgetown, in that all the forests were leveled. About 15 or 20 feet off the ground, it looked like someone had taken a big mower and just chopped them down, you know.
We have friends in McClellanville that had an absolutely gorgeous old home that they had painstakingly restored, only to not even find a splinter of it. Not a splinter of it was left. It was completely taken away.
McClellanville also had many, many large live oak trees, and the oak trees were just devastated by the winds from the storm. So the area that was heavily treed was almost denuded from the force of the wind. It was just so, and when you walked in, drove into the main street, in the past you would have almost a tunnel type effect with the tree cover. It was all gone, and you could see the sky, and it was, it was just night and day difference between what the place was like before the storm and then what it was like after the storm.
My father had an office on Front Street. He was an optometrist, and there was a big flood there when Hugo came through, and he had 6 feet of water in his office. So he was forced to resign overnight and to retire overnight, and he really had just about retired anyway, but it had a devastating effect on him.
Once the road started clearing up, we had a gas station that we pumped the gas for our customers, and as of that morning, once we could get the generator up and going and get all the electricity going on that, we had customers start coming in with chainsaws and all these different things, and we pumped gas we pumped gas from daylight to dark pretty much non-stop. The cars were backed up down the road from several miles, and we eventually had to earmark it at $10, no more than $10 per car.
Probably 3 days later, I went to work and had to work by candlelight. That was when the computers were just coming in, but we had to do everything by hand, handwritten. And I always remembered writing 9/21/89 on all the claims that I had, claim after claim.
We did have a few people that jacked up the prices real quick.
Yeah.
But it's sort of ironic, those same people now aren't in business.
Right, because people remembered.
I worked at Dr. Joseph in Joseph's office down on Front Street. And of course, I knew that town was bad, and especially on Front Street because there's always a water problem there. So I came in, took the back streets in so that I wouldn't have to deal with water. Got to our office and unlocked. I brought pails and buckets and cleaning stuff and just anything I could think of to help with the office work because everybody else was out of town. And unlocked the back door and went in, and there was not a drop of water in our office, but sitting right across the street between the Rice Museum and the town clock was this great big boat.
We had a lot of older people in the community who didn't have a whole lot to do but were skilled tradesmen, and so you would see them uptown helping out around different stores and whatnot. Maybe somebody hadn't normally you'd see just sitting in one of the restaurants eating breakfast for from 5 o'clock in the morning until 11 or 12 during the day because they didn't have anything else to do. Those guys were actually uptown trying to help out, do different things around stores, help people around their houses and whatnot. It was actually a community thing.
I just kind of was hoping that we'd hurry up and get electricity back. We didn't have, it messed up my job. I was a waitress at Land's End at that time. And so we didn't have anybody coming to the restaurant when I went back to work, and so that meant no tips for me.
I lived next door to another property owner, and there were a lot of pine trees on the left side of the driveway and a lot on the right side. Now, it took me 4 hours to cut myself out of the driveway so I could go to check the damage in other places.
And I stayed in the area of Georgetown called Greentown, and we couldn't even come into the city. We couldn't, couldn't go nowhere, so we was basically confined right there at home. But we had enough supplies and everything to take us through.
I had to get clean every day without anything, so we all lined up down at the river, and they took turns. We just covered the whole place up, and everybody got clean, and they got back out. Eating, you had to either eat your canned stuff you already got, or I see my sister-in-law cook a pizza on a grill, which was very strange, but she did it.
After about 8 days, I went out and took a bath in the ditch, the drainage ditch. It runs my property out to the road.
They had a pond that we had to take baths from. And the guys would go down and take baths, and then the aunts and the ladies would go down and take baths.
But to clean up and, just getting everything back to normal, I mean, it took weeks and probably months to probably get everything at my home back to normal. And a lot of the places around town, the businesses, they were closed up for quite a while. So it was a real experience.
We didn't have no electrician, and then we didn't have no water, so we had to go to a teasing well down the road, probably about a mile, for us to wash clothes and then wash wood and drink water.
We lived farther out of the city limits, and we went 3 weeks without electricity. It was quite interesting. We had to go back to school, and there was still no electricity.
I have a friend that is a logger. He came over with his chainsaw and climbed up the trees and cut them off the carport.
We had been campers, and we still had our cook stove. So, I keep canned goods. I like canned goods.
We had no bathroom facilities out in the country since we had no power, which was one of the worst things about the hurricane. And being stuck there together with not a whole lot to do was one of the worst things too. My husband and I did try to cook on a little stove, which was not successful.
My grandmother lived through the Depression, so she was very resourceful. When she heard that it was coming, she immediately started stockpiling food and water. So we were fine that way. We were able to brush our teeth and take, bird baths. No full showers, which was hard on a 12-year-old girl.
You have to cook everything on your little burner, your gas grills, and luckily we had things in the freezer, like shrimp or fish or deer meat, hamburger, any of that. And of course, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, beanie weenies out the can, that kind of stuff. It was almost like camping in your house.
We had to go to a friend's house to either take showers, use a restroom, and then either go to Burger King to use the bathroom. And I remember we would go to the store, it's no longer a business, Winn-Dixie, and it was totally empty of food. All the food was gone, so we had to just go here and there wherever we could for like canned goods and stuff like that.
We stayed in the house, and of course we didn't have electricity or, well, we had water, but no hot water. but we had a gas stove so we could cook. Many of our friends came and we cooked for them and just sort of had a gay old time.
I actually thought it was fun because we got a curfew. The whole city had a curfew. We had to be in at 12 o'clock. I worked at McDonald's, so we had to shut down everything by 10 o'clock. Everybody was just like it was like a big party, I think. Because everybody was together, the cleanup, everybody was together. I mean, we basically had cookouts. It was like a big family reunion.
We basically went to work trying to clear the highways and help clear the highways and get a passageway back into town and open it up, help open it up to get back into town the people that were still here that had refused to leave, and to get ice and to get generators and things in where they could, have staples and things that people needed to get by with.
We were out of school for about 10 days, I think. And in that time, I don't think there was a day went by that I wasn't working with some church group or some crew going down McClellanville and other places to clear up houses and roads and things like that. I don't think we could have made it. We had waited on the state to do it, and that's no knock on them. It was just such an overwhelming experience.
We had a lot of people who, for whatever reason, needed food or needed clothes. I don't know what the house situation was, but they had problems. And so I did help at Baptist Church. I'm a Methodist, but I helped at the Baptist Church with serving some of the meals.
Then I went and helped at the Hallmark store because that store was devastated. The water came in, busted the front windows out, and all the paper products were across the street, and I stayed down there for weeks after that helping her salvage anything that she could salvage out of it.
Afterwards, I worked for International Paper Company, and we volunteered to go over to McClellanville, and we assisted at one of the schools there where people were having to actually camp out there because their homes had been flooded.
I worked for Walmart, and McClellanville was really, and all down there, all of them were terrible. And they opened Walmart down in McClellanville or wherever it was outside Charleston, and would walk people in with a flashlight and let them get what they needed and pay at the door. They didn't open the store, but the employees went and walked people in because they were walking in water up to their knees. So they got, duct tape and tarps and things they had to have.
I know a truck came by to like the people that didn't have any water. They was like getting, like gallons off of the truck. Sometimes 2 cases depending on how big the family was.
But what I really remember mostly about that time was the help of the people. Because there I was with those kids and everything out at that house, and everything was cut off. No lights, no electricity. But neighbors, men that I never saw before, came down and saw my car was, the tree was on my car. And they ran and got saws and came back and got the tree off the car because it would still run, but it was just totaled. And so it was the people, were just amazing during that time.
You started to learn about, other people that have been right under your nose the whole time. Because, they're your neighbors, but they're your waving neighbors. Hey, how you doing? And you keep on going because of life. So this kind of made us all stand still. And, we had to communicate by walking to somebody's house to tell them something or find out did they have anything. So in a sense, it put you all in the same boat, so to speak.
They really came together. Nobody had any problems with anyone, If you had a problem with somebody, it was set aside because we needed each other. And so we all came together and was one community, one big, loving, happy community.
I've thought many times, you know, how ironic that they evacuate us from Hilton Head, and yet we get to Columbia and they're hit hard, no power. The city is packed because everybody's been evacuated to Columbia. So, but it worked out fine for us, and we got a beautiful daughter.
The bright normal was when the lights said bloom and everybody had lights, so that was more happiness for us.
It was one of the most exciting days in newspapering, and it was the only way people could find out any information, because they couldn't get TV unless you had a battery-powered radio, which not many people do. You would hear because you would expect power to be out, but power was out for many, many people for 3 weeks. So the newspaper became their real lifeline to info. School was out. They didn't have any way to turn the lights on or cook. And really the biggest problem for everybody was you couldn't buy gas because the stores didn't have electricity either. So you couldn't go and pump gas. We had some outlets for our delivery people to get gasoline, and we churned out a paper every day. It was like the days when the newspaper was the only game in town.
It took months for, in fact, I think there perhaps might be some places in town that have yet not fully recovered.
It done something to me. It made me realize that nothing don't last forever. And I was a big hunter, fisherman during that period of time. And after Hugo, it seemed like if I heard a squirrel or seen a squirrel or something, instead of going to hunt it, I'd rather go carry the air squirrel, or carry the air corn rather, so to speak, you know. But it did do something. It affected some people real bad. And it affected me to a certain point, because the island that I hunted on, where the big white oak trees and all was plentiful and whatnot, when I went over on the island that next day with my nephew and by boat, all the trees was gone. They was all blew over. And it was just devastating, you know, to realize that a place that you hunted and loved to hunt on and whatnot was destroyed.
It's an experience I don't want to have to go through. I know living where I do, that is a possibility, a great possibility. But you do the best you can with it and pray that God protects you.
I hope we don't get one. I think that's everyone's. I guess I have the essentials. I have candles and flashlights and some things like that.
Anything 1 to 5, I would leave. You know, if they tell you to leave, leave. Don't stay here. Let the professionals handle their job and get out of Dodge and go to higher ground.